Hi there, lovely soul. Welcome. I am so glad you're here. This moment feels really special because it's the beginning of something new I'm weaving into the podcast. You see, each conversation we have here runs so deep, uncovering layers of wisdom and connection. And I've realized there's a richness in these threads that deserves more time, more space to breathe, and more time to unfold. So this series is my way of offering that a quiet pause to reflect on what was shared, to explore those golden threads further, and to invite you to journey a little bit deeper within yourself. So let's take this time together to sit with what resonates, expand on the insights, and let it all settle into your heart. Reflecting on my podcast with Bronwyn Coles, I am still in so much awe of how that conversation unfolded. It is probably the first time I've fully allowed myself to go unscripted with questions, and I really think it shows. And I'll confess that it's easier to do that for a couple of reasons. Because I know Bronwyn. I know her personally. She's a new friend, but we had an instant connection. And secondly, it helps that she was open and vulnerable. Most of my guests, I don't know them personally, so I can understand that it feels challenging. And I can understand that for some of them, they've never been on a podcast before. So there's this self-imposed pressure, and it changes the dynamic a bit. But I do love deep diving into each conversation. And when my guests surrender, and they do, the magic starts to pour through. Sometimes it takes a couple of questions for our energies to sync up, but once that happens, the channeling and the flow becomes much easier for us both, and my guests can start to let go. But with Bronwyn, our energies were synced from the beginning, and I love that. From the get-go, we start talking about Saturn returns and the transformation of her Saturn return and how that led to her work. And for those who don't know, Saturn returns occur at age 29 in the late 50s, aka midlife crisis, and again in your late 80s. But Saturn themes are brought up around your late 20s to start with. That's the first one. And they have a lot to do with greater responsibilities, putting in a hell of a lot of hard work, finding greater structure in your life, and laying stronger foundations for your future. It's also the beginning of your internal spiritual deep dive. The second Saturn return, when you're 58, brings with it an awareness around mortality. And that makes sense. You're kind of at the halfway point. But Saturn gets you to slow down, and it makes you look at reality, and it makes you think about how much time is left and how you're going to use that time. Are you going to keep procrastinating, or are you going to do some of the things that your heart is longing for? It might be a book that you've always wanted to write. It might be traveling. It might be some of the other things on your bucket list. But that's generally what happens around that age. And our last Saturn return happens at age 87. And this, if we're lucky enough to get to it, marks a profound reflection, a profound period of reflection. And it is about integration and closure. And it makes sense, right? Because you're coming towards the end of your life. So you're thinking about legacy, you're thinking about releasing attachments, you're thinking about any unfinished business. And it's a time for deep spiritual reflection, and it encourages acceptance about what's going to happen. And it also is about what it makes you think about what is going to come next. But I figure by then, if you've been doing the work, you'll find it's a sacred opportunity to honor the journey and prepare for what lies beyond. And I'm thinking for a lot of us, that's going to be a completely different time from the experiences we see happening at the moment with those at that age. Now, there is definitely not enough spoken about Saturn returns. So I love that this came through, and I love how we got to talk about how we can support those in the 20s who are coming up to that time. And I love how Bronwyn shares how she planned to take time off for the inner exploration. And I feel like that is a really important thing to do if you have the opportunity. If you've got kids who are in the 20s, I highly recommend that you help them prepare for that. I mean, that would have been an absolute game changer if someone had helped me during that time. In saying that, I wasn't really ready. I was one of those people that I was one of those people that likes to do things the hard way. So when that sort of spiritual awakening happened, which happens at in the first Saturn return, I I was in full chaos, and I explained that in the podcast. But I I I was struggling so much that I had to give myself at least 12 months off to do that inner exploration. And that I was lucky that I had that opportunity to do that. But a lot of people don't. And I really like that Brahman was saying that you can still keep working and getting on with your life while you do the inner exploration. But the more the people around us have an understanding that this is what's happening in our life, the better we can provide each other with that support. So I thought that was really important. But I love that Bronwyn took time to explore things in her life in when that first Saturn return happened, but how she was able to merge her corporate work and her learning into one. And to me, that's really extraordinary. I feel like this is what the world needs. We need to allow ourselves this space. And I feel like because the world is operating so fast and everyone's rushing to get to the next thing and the next thing, they're not spending time dealing with things properly. And that's why during the 30s, things become even harder for a lot of people, and in the 40s, because they're just not dealing with any of what came through early on from age 29. Meanwhile, I will say when Brahman was talking about Sedona, I I don't know about you, but I just feel such a strong call to go there. I'd love to just go there for a few months and just woo woo it out there, just be a full gypsy. And I'm hoping that I will get that opportunity. I feel like there is something really unique in the energy there. I can't quite, and because I haven't been there, I don't know, but there's something I can't quite place my fingers on, my thoughts on, but I just feel like like energetically, I just feel like it is a place for a lot of expansion, and to be surrounded by like-minded people, I think would be really beneficial. Anyway, Bronwyn talks about her learning from the land, both in America and here in Australia. And I'm so in awe of healers who have this experience with nature. To me, it is so intriguing, and I really love learning how they communicate with nature and spirit. Everyone has their own unique way of connecting to spirit, and I just love that there is no one way. There is just a way that is meant for you, and it's why it's so important to follow your own path. You need to challenge yourself to dive deeper within and let your spirit team and your guides teach you, and you need to let them lead the way. It is very easy to get caught up in the learning process with others, like having other people facilitate you through that process. But the absolute best way is on your own, and trusting yourself to do this. Right? It is a trust building exercise, but you know how to do this. We came into the world knowing how. When Bronwyn shares how she was putting herself in places where she could open up and receive the energy and the wisdom, it just it just made so much sense, because she shares that connecting with nature builds trust not only with ourselves, but with others. And that being in nature, because it's multi-dimensional energy rather than a person, she was able to see where she was lacking trust with others. Like, imagine how significant that is. Like, imagine realizing that nature is teaching you that. And it's a really important thing to note because whether we know it or not, all of us have a lack of trust. The world as it is perpetuates this without us realizing. But what a gift it is to remind ourselves to be in nature more now, more than ever. The fact that nature teaches us how to protect ourselves, how to recharge our batteries, and how we can spend more time strengthening ourselves and how to return back to our truth reminds us how important it is. Especially because we are in a year 9, which is all about closing cycles, major transformations, and transitions. The more we lean into this, the better it's going to be. We go on to talk about how important it is to give back to the earth as well. And given that the earth is helping us and our healing and transmuting energy, isn't it a greater like consideration that we need to place on that as well? Like being of service is not just about helping others, but it's about helping the earth as well. And I love that Bronwyn explains how she does that. So she asks the earth, how, like, what can I do to help? Is there anything that I can do to help? And she just waits for the response. And sometimes there's a yes, and sometimes there's a no. But being of service means doing both of those things. And she talks about how the earth is evolving like we are, and it's facilitating change. And as change makers, we come in to change the evolution of this earth. And it's an important reminder that we embrace the opportunity to do all that we can to help this change occur. Now, out of all of my podcasts, and this is going to be a big call, this podcast is my absolute favorite, and I'm going to explain to you why. One of the reasons is because it's a very deep conversation right from the beginning. It's just deep. But the other reason, and the main reason, is because we dive into a topic that's just not spoken about. I don't hear people speaking about this in podcasts. And what I'm talking about is initiations. Now, initiations happen in different ways, big and small, at different stages of our lives. And there are some more obvious ones like childbirth, perimenopause, menopause, our Saturn returns, when death cycles, near death experiences, things like that. But the initiations that aren't regularly spoken about are the spiritual ones. Now, what gets me excited about this was the fact that I too have never shared about this. A few close friends of mine know about my spiritual initiations, but I've never spoken about it in the public forum. And when I asked Bronwyn to share, she just dived right in. And so this is what makes it my favorite because it's just open. The whole conversation is just open, and there was no hesitation for her to share her experience. And so there was just this mutual joy where we could just go even deeper into the energy. And these questions, there's no way that they could have been scripted. And that is also what happens when you surrender and, more importantly, just trust. Spiritual initiations are profound and they're sacred. And sometimes they happen randomly, and other times there is a series of initiations that happen in close proximity to each other. And there are lots of, as I said, there are lots of different types of initiations as well. But again, these generally happen when you're working on your own, when you're ready to open up and embody the energy. They just happen at the exact right time. And it is an incredibly intense experience, and 100% you are never the same again. Perhaps you've had an initiation that stands out to you. I'd really like to know how much reverence you've given that time in your life. Have you ever taken the time to acknowledge how important it was? Have you ever shared that with somebody else? If you don't believe you've ever had an initiation that you're conscious of course, why not challenge yourself to explore this? The best way is through meditation and asking spirit for assistance. And that's all you need to do. You just need to let your guides lead the way. Bronwyn and I chat about the importance of who you share these experiences with, especially if you have yet to anchor in this new energy. Initiations set a new blueprint within you, and it takes a long time for this transformation to take place. And as part of your self respect, you first need to hold the energy, and then when you feel comfortable, you share it with the world. One of the things that does my absolute head in, and this is going to sound judgy, but hear me out, is the healers, the coaches, the spiritually inclined people online who record themselves crying when something major is happening in their life. To me, these situations feel incredibly opportunistic. And I know that when I'm going through it, when I'm in the thick, deep healing, my first thought isn't, oh, hey, let me press record and I'll just share this on my socials. I'll tell you a little story. I once had someone scheduled in for the podcast, and I noticed that on their socials, in the couple, they posted while they were in hospital. The reel and the video describe them having just miscarried. And the phone, you can tell the phone is being propped up on the tray table or whatever it is. It's not a person that's filming them. And they're holding each other crying. And it's a sacred moment that is not normally shared. And rightly so, it's a sacred time. They are literally in the hospital. She's literally in the bed, just having finished miscarrying. And the thought is, hey, let's get the phone out and prop it up. This will be good content to share with our audience. And then I thought, okay, well, that's not great, but let's just move on. This isn't the norm. All right. But in that same week, there's videos of them at a funeral, and there's footage of what should be a sacred moment with the coffin, and they're filming. And to me, this plays on people's emotions, and it connects people energetically by connecting to the drama, and it feels horrid. And so I cancelled the interview. I didn't explain why I cancelled the interview because of that, but there's no way I could have had someone come on this podcast when integrity is my number one value, knowing that they're acting out like that. Doesn't mean that their work isn't good. Doesn't mean that they don't add value, because we need as many people creating change as possible. But that is not honoring the initiation that you're going through. It isn't. Your mind is on taking advantage of the opportunity that you're in. It is not being there with your feelings. It's spiritual bypassing. It also doesn't help that I've had 4 miscarriages. So I know what is running through your mind at those times, and none of them is, let me share this online. None of them is, hey, we could use this to show people more of the behind the scenes and they can jump into our program or coaching container. This is a really great way of luring people in. No. Yes, people want what is real. Yes, people want what's behind the scenes, but not like this. And even more so when it comes to sacred initiations like that. Bronwyn shares, and I totally agree, that back when we were going through our initiations many years ago, it's not like it is now. Spirituality has become way more mainstream, much more mainstream. So when those occurred for us, we kept it under the radar. We didn't speak about it. So I guess my point is that there is a way to share experiences, but only once it's been anchored and only when you feel ready. Like, share the stories, take people on a journey, but do it with integrity, please. Ultimately, to me, this shows me where people are at. And more often than not, because of the spiritual bypassing, there is a sadness that people are just trying to escape. And I find that very sad. Anyway, one of the important things about doing the internal work is the fact that you expand your frequency and energetic capacity. And that means you get to take people that you work with on a much deeper journey, and it has significantly more impact. And as change makers, this is something that we value, right? When you start to open up to the initiation process and when you consciously choose this path, you're choosing to deepen your connection with spirit, yourself, with others, and your purpose. It is energetically preparing you for your work. And so when I experienced my Egyptian initiations, I had no idea what it all meant, but I trusted that it would ultimately lead to some sort of understanding, and it did. And while I was talking to Bronwyn, I started to channel in a message where I say that there are a group of healers who are holding space for others because of their initiation experience. And I go on to channel that the initiations are creating a space for this next level of awakening to happen. Now, just diving a bit deeper into that, what I'm seeing is that it is creating an emotional stability in all of the chaos. It's lifting the heaviness for those stepping in to help and heal others. It's helping to lift the energetic load. Thank God, right? The spiritual space is changing. And as I acknowledge that more and more people are waking up, which is fantastic, it is also why I'm so passionate about not diluting the language I use when I work with corporates and those who aren't aware yet. My intention, and it has been this way from the beginning, is that this is the norm and this is what becomes the mainstream. And the more we talk about it, the more language we use like this, the more it becomes the norm. And eventually the fear that and the dismissed response that we're currently getting is going to dissolve. And so with my work specifically, I am a disruptor. I'm compassionate and understanding, but the truth is always spoken, always. I'm opening hearts and I'm realigning energy in these workplaces. There is no time for coddling. And the reason that I say that is because they already have that. These corporates already have the coddling. That does not create change. And when I understood my purpose, I knew that I was shining a light on the shadow. And this makes people uncomfortable. But what is interesting as I reflect is that when I look back, that is what I have done my whole life. I just didn't understand why. And my family, bless them, they didn't understand why either. And I was ashamed of it. But the initiations helped me heal and hold it. And it helped me get comfortable with my shadow. But that meant I had to accept all the parts I hid, the parts I encouraged to hide, the parts I was encouraged to hide, that I encouraged myself to hide. And that has taken years to decondition from, and I work on that every single day. And the same will happen for you if it hasn't already. Maybe you're already in the thick of it and it's okay. I see you. Keep going and trust the process. In our conversation, Bronwyn also reflects and shares her perspective on how humanity has lost the sacredness when it comes to initiations. And her story about her kids being initiated was so incredible. Like, wasn't it remarkable when she describes how the Aboriginal elders explained to her kids that first Bronwyn needed to eat because she was a guest of honor, and then the elders could eat, and then by hierarchy in the community, and then the kids could eat? Like, to me, that was just a beautiful example of divine masculine energy creating reverence for the divine feminine. In a scenario that would probably have terrified most people, Bronwyn used her intuition to guide her. She trusted and she knew she was safe among a large group of strange men. During her story, she shares about her boys being initiated by the elders and how important that was. That stood out to me as well, because imagine we lived in a world where teen boys are given a rite of passage. Our world would be so different in a million ways. Imagine how the energy would transform this world. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, where in this world we trusted men and where women could soften. Imagine that for men, they knew they were trusted and that they too could surrender and soften and be held. I pray I see this in our lifetime. I really do. I channeled a message during that conversation where I shared that there is a new version of what being powerful is, and that those who've been through initiation, one or many, what that energy actually feels like, what it really feels like to be in that space. Those who've been through the process are actively working to hold the frequency of that space for more and more of humanity to step into, whether they are masculine or feminine, doesn't matter. And Bronwyn adds that some people naturally hold that space, like they were born like that in the midline. And I agree, this new generation of kids being born, the ones post 2020, they're like that. Lucky ducks. But one of the things that was important that came through from my perspective is the realization that underneath all of this imbalance in the world is grief, deep, unhealed grief. And it has no outlet because people are avoiding dealing with it. They're using all sorts of external things to fill the space so not to feel it. Maybe they don't even realize they're in grief. And it's sad. That is why people act out. It's why the grief is leaking out. And you might have noticed that with the people around you. But when you look at your own energy, is there anything you're ignoring? Like, where is there capacity for you to bring more of yourself forward? And where is there opportunity for more self-love? More self-love. This is a reminder to continue to be disciplined with self-love, especially if you're a change maker. Bronwyn agreed that as change makers, we're more challenged than others. So this is vital for our well-being. Staying in our center is the key, and that is where the real strength is. And we need to cultivate it. We need to give ourselves the grace so that we continue to feel supported. The tests, they're going to come. The bigger your purpose, the bigger the dreams, the greater the impact. But the more centered you need to be so you aren't energetically pulled from pillar to post. Another standout that Bronwyn shares is the fact that for the most part, People operating in this world are still in people pleasing. And it's something that I hadn't thought about until she mentioned it. Whether it's parents, a partner, a boss, they people please. So they continue to look for things outside of themselves. But you can't have self love and people please. We need to make a choice. And I don't know about you, but I choose self love. I'm sick of people pleasing. I'm a reformed people pleaser. But self love shapes our life and it shapes what we're like as a human, as a leader, and as a change maker. Self love is a forever activity. It isn't a one and done. And unfortunately, part of the process is loving the shadow aspects within ourselves. That takes time to heal, and these components activate at different times. You just can't rush through it, hence the spiritual bypassing I was referring to earlier. One of the blessings of this podcast is towards the end, Bronwyn talks about how each of us have come through a set of encoding, and she takes us through a technique to activate our highest vibrational encoding. And to say I love this is an understatement, and I love it because you never hear this on a podcast. So good. And you can come back to this at any time. And I fully encourage you to when you start to get the wobbles or when you start to feel like things are getting a bit challenging. Need to make sure that you keep a note of any visions or signs that come through. No forcing, just allow it to happen as it's meant to. And Bronwyn does say that if the energy starts to feel a bit too full on, that you can ask your guides and your team to just ease things up. You're in complete and total control. Intention is everything. And it really was a gift to have her share this in our conversation. So there we have it. This conversation with Bronwyn was nothing short of transformative. It was a tapestry of wisdom and insight that I hope has sparked something within you. And as I reflect on the sacredness of initiations, the healing power of nature, and the necessity of self-love, I invite you to sit with what resonated most deeply with you. Let these truths settle into your heart. Let it guide you toward greater alignment with your purpose. Remember, you are your own greatest teacher. Trust yourself, honor your journey, and allow the unfolding to happen in divine timing. Until next time, keep leaning into the magic, nurture your light, and embrace the beautiful change maker that you are. Thank you for sharing this space with me. With love, Marianne.